So, right, good morning. You're very welcome to our presentation here today on Brexit and preparing for the end of the transition. My name is Aidan Flynn. I'm the General Manager for the Freight Transport Association. So we're delighted that you have taken time out to join us here this morning for this important briefing, particularly as we count down to the end of transition on the 31st of December. I'm delighted to welcome Caroline O'Keefe from Revenue, Noreen Galvin from the Department of Agriculture, and Carl Lynch from the Clarion, who will give presentations on a topic and issues that I'm sure you're very, very aware of. But I think the purpose of this is kind of reinforcement of the issues, get you thinking again, particularly in terms of linking in your own supply chains, asking questions, and hopefully getting a little bit more clarity on issues that you need more clarity on for this very, very complex issue as we move towards the end of transition and not really understanding and knowing what that is going to fully look like, although we do know that the trading environment is changing. So here we are, 1st of January is less than 60 days away. We see negotiations are intensifying, but the music coming, particularly from the EU side yesterday, even from Michel Barnier, is not good. It doesn't look like they're making a lot of progress in terms of key issues, in terms of level playing pitch. So with time running out, Barnier is highlighting that next week is going to be critical in terms of us understanding where we are going to be going from the 1st of January. So the intensity of our own preparations needs to considerably improve, I would imagine, and we need to understand what this trading environment is going to be doing for all of our businesses. So that engagement within our own supply chain, engagement with our customers is really important. So deal or no deal, change is coming. The real issues for the industry here at the moment, obviously, is COVID has had a massive impact in terms of 2020, in terms of ability to prepare and understand what's coming. It's deflected interest away from everything else, unfortunately. But Brexit hasn't gone away, as we know, and the 1st of January is coming at a pace. We need to know what is defined by the transition period. Of course, we're in a transition period, but we're not transitioning to anything. We're not practicing what the new trading environment is, and we don't have time to actually implement the new processes and regulatory requirements, because they're just going to hit us with a bang unless the rabbit is pulled out of the hat into this comprehensive free trade agreement that everybody would like. And what is the cost of that transition? What's the cost going to be towards business, both in terms of time, in terms of upskilling, but also in terms of new administrative burdens? And we need to be realistic that we need a pragmatic approach from everybody. And that's why I'm really delighted that both Revenue and Department of Agriculture are on the call today, because industry needs to work with key stakeholders in ensuring that we can all work together for solutions, because this is going to be a new experience for everybody, and it will require quite a bit of patience and time after the 1st of January to bed in properly. So just a nice little graphic here from the CSO a couple of years ago. It's a bit out of date, but just to put things in context, we're importing and exporting over 30 billion of trading goods with the United Kingdom, so a substantial market for us. And the rest of the world, 85 billion exports, 55 billion in terms of imports, and quite a considerable amount of activity between the UK and Ireland, as we know, is in the agri-food sector. In terms of our trade with our continental European partners, I suppose, key partners will be Belgium, Germany, Netherlands, France and Italy. And in terms of import partners, France at 11 billion is nearly half the amount that we're reliant on the UK market for. Germany at 11, Netherlands, Belgium and Italy and so on. So we're importing nearly 20 billion from the UK, and from the rest of these 5 key European colleagues, only 29 billion. So you can see the challenges at hand in terms of getting product to market, but also on the backside trying to bring goods into the country is significant. And it's really important in the context of understanding how supply chain works, in terms of how your business works, in terms of getting the product out, perhaps to continental Europe, but what type of goods are you bringing back into the country? And that's how the land bridge, I suppose, has worked well for companies in the past, but is that still viable is the question. So in terms of trade with the UK, they're going to be outside the customs union. So we're looking at tariffs, we're looking at VAT implications, rules of origin issues, and of course declarations. And while it's been outside the single market, and this is where it becomes very tricky in terms of the trade of agri-food products and so on. Non-tariff barriers, we've heard a lot about SPS, side effect, sanitary trade checks, border control posts, and Noreen's going to be giving us an update in relation to all of those things. But there's other subtle issues that need to be considered. So operators and haulage operators who are employing drivers with UK licenses and they're based in Ireland, they need to change those driving licenses to an Irish European driving license. Driver CPC qualification now has to be transferred over to a European Union qualification for drivers in the country of residency. Trade qualifications in the haulage operation, the management of haulage operations require transport manager CPC qualification. If a manager is operating a haulage fleet in Ireland and has a British issued CPC qualification, he needs to, or she needs to register to do an exam within 6 months to requalify, unfortunately, in the European state that they're working in. And I believe there's around 200 managers that fit into that boat based in Ireland at the minute, so that's for consideration. We've heard a lot in the last couple of weeks around ECMT licensing. So the movement of vehicles across borders into member states' territories isn't liberalised, it's organised under community licence. Of course, the UK are outside that regime from the 1st of January. So the automatic default, unless there's a new arrangement, is for this ECMT licensing, and it's a permit regime. And unfortunately, there is only enough permits to cover 10 to 20% of volume. And that's a real problem for the industry, and it's a problem for north-south trade indeed, because it's not even a part of the Northern Ireland Protocol. It needs to be agreed between the EU and the UK. So what everybody's pushing for in the event of worst case scenario of the situation is that the European Commission would, again, like they did in 2019, issue a transport connectivity contingency plan, which would ensure that we do not need to rely on ECMT licensing for a number of months, whilst the two states can agree some sort of permit regime that is fit for purpose. And the other complexity about this, I suppose, at the minute, why it's back in the news, is that the UK have taken a decision to open an application process for ECMT licensing, but Ireland hasn't. Ireland are waiting on the outcome of the negotiations, and obviously pushing to have the contingency plan put in place to take account of this in the short term. So just a quick slide here of the Irish border controls. You can see Revenue, the Gardaí, Department of Social Welfare, Department of Agriculture, local trading standards, and so on. These bodies are already active in the port, but now, of course, their activities are increasing incredibly so. And as I mentioned, that's why it's really important to be hearing from them. And I know they've been very much working on an outreach program to industry as well. But it's very important from an industry perspective that we do understand and recognise and know what their roles are at our Irish ports as this trading environment changes. So moving on to land bridge versus direct routes, and I think this is really important in the context of obviously looking back at our kind of trading partners from the continental European perspective, understanding that Ireland is on a small island on the periphery of Europe, and our population, 5 million people or so, is relatively low and small compared to our European partners, where economies of scale are driven by the size of the market and so on. So it's really important that for the welfare of Ireland's economy, that our connectivity with our key trading partners is preserved. And so how does that work? Well, at the minute, the land bridge is very, very efficient. It's quick, it's secure, and it's preferred route of access for a lot of people to continental Europe. But issues for consideration will be the number of ports that operators that will now have to enter and exit on their journey from Ireland to continental Europe and vice versa. Authorised economic operators, in terms of operating under transit regime, under a system that offers simplifications for this transit. How prepared are we in relation to all of that? I think there's less than 280 authorised economic operator businesses registered in Ireland. And then we have to look at the UK, and this is really, really relevant in terms of the UK's preparation for Brexit. Unfortunately, from an Irish perspective, if they are not prepared, and they're obviously divergent in a lot of ways in terms of their preparation from a European perspective, and that's their right, I suppose, but they have different systems that we all need to be aware of and considerate of. So they have a new Checker HGV is ready to cross a border service on top of everything else, which is an additional permit regime to access Kent, for argument's sake, if you're using the land bridge to try and get to Dover Port or so on, or to Eurotunnel. So the uncertainty of the land bridge grows with all of this, because we know that there is going to be traffic congestion. We will know that there is going to be a requirement for checks and so on. And we need to be asking ourselves questions of, how long will the delays be on the land bridge on a daily basis, at what time, how certain are we that it can be a viable process, and what alternatives do we have, if any. And the real thing about all of this is compliance, because now we're in a third country, and if we aren't compliant with the paperwork and requirements in the UK, what protections do we have? How easy is it going to be to get vehicles released? If there is disputes in relation to that, all of that is for grabs at the minute. And of course, even transiting under the CTC, there is going to be additional cost of guarantee bonds, and there is going to be a lot of questions, and indeed there is a lot of questions about arrival back into the EU, and where those transits can be discharged from a French perspective. And of course, there is no kind of magic green lane for Irish businesses to transit down into the various different ports. Issues for consideration in terms of direct routes, I suppose, really is there alternatives to the land bridge at the moment that are actually viable? So, we do have connections between France in terms of Cherbourg and Roscoff, but is that really an alternative to the land bridge, which predominantly goes into Calais and more easternly up to Zeebrugge from Hull and so on? So is Calais really the option? Is there other solutions trying to get direct into the likes of Boulogne, or indeed even Le Havre as an option, or Calais or Dunkirk direct opportunities? Bearing in mind, the likes of Calais say that just under 10% of their trade is with Irish operators, so they really don't want to lose that from the land bridge either. But what are the options? What is the time to market? As I mentioned earlier, how many hours of delay can you take on the land bridge to make a direct route if there was new ferry opportunities from Ireland to these places and more beneficial? We have to be considerate of the cost, but we also have to be very aware that if we are going to go from Ireland to continental Europe, we don't have to worry about any of this additional administrative burden that is going to be faced for Ireland-UK trade. So just repeating kind of some of the old stuff here in relation to the importance of having an EORI number for trade with the UK. Also in terms of notification of imports into Ireland to revenue in terms of 2 hours prior to arrival at ports, and 24 hours notice must be given to the Department of Agriculture for agri-food products. Big one, and there's a trial at the minute in terms of testing Wi-Fi, which is very, very important in terms of understanding how drivers can get access to their routing, because we'll have to check 30 minutes before arrival into Dublin or Rosslare to attain our routing. for either green to exit or red to go to various different areas in the ports for checks. And ferry operators obviously changing the terms and conditions. And I think that's important in terms of understanding what documentation is actually needed upon arrival at ferry terminals and what needs to be presented. And it's really important, therefore, that drivers really understand the role in relation to this. But collectively, that role between the drivers, the declarant, the importers or exporters and all that, it must be cohesive and it must be very clear. Other big issues for Dublin Port in particular, because of the traffic and the volumes in and out of the port, and of course as a city, normally busy city that feeds out onto the M50, is understanding what the traffic management plans for the environs of Dublin Port are going to be. So in terms of new trading environment, as I mentioned, who is responsible? What is the role of the declarant? I think Carol Lynch will help answer a few questions in relation to that. We know in terms of, and I can be corrected if I'm wrong here, but in terms of the obligations on the various state bodies in terms of what they're mandated to do and check, it's certainly a lot of checking will be based on intelligence, but you're looking at 6% documentary checks for customs, around 2% physical checks. So it doesn't seem like there's going to be an awful lot of requirement for checks from a customs perspective. But that changes considerably if you're importing food or live animals so you're looking at 100% documentary checks for goods of animal origin, live animals and so on, plants, and on average 30% physical checks. So that's quite considerable in terms of understanding what you need to do. So you need to assess your level of exposure. You need to look at direct or indirect options. You need to talk to ferry companies. You need to talk to ports. You need to talk to obviously trade associations like ourselves. But you need to understand what the impact is going to be on you, your customers and logistics partners. And you need to look at see what the opportunities are, because there are opportunities. And then of course train and plan. So you know, you're on a call with us today. It's effectively training. It's effectively, you know, becoming more aware of what's required to continue to do that. But I would also suggest, particularly for haulage operators or own account operators who have drivers over and back to the UK, that they really look at how they are disseminating the information down to the drivers, because the driver effectively is the only one of the chain who is going to have direct contact with and physical contact with the state regulatory bodies. And then you need to implement and you need to review your IT systems, and you develop new relationships if needs be with your customs partners and so on. So that's me for the minute. I will hand you over now to Carol Ann. I will, Carol Ann, and you are ready to go. And I look forward to any questions that you have. As I said, if you want to put them in on the chat there, I will put them to all our guest speakers as we go along. Thank you.
Hi, Aidan. No, I'm not seeing an option here for me to be able to pull up that file I want to share.
Okay.
It's given me
on the bottom. Is there a share?
Yeah, I have it open, but it's asking me to select a window or an application, so I have it in my download.
Yeah, true. I can't help you there, Carol, I'm afraid. So
okay, well, I'm just going to email. I look, there isn't a lot of content that everyone hasn't seen. I'm just going to send this on to you.
And I'll put it up here. Yeah. Anyway,
and so look, guys, Carol Ann O'Keefe here, from the Revenue Commissioners, and I am going to speak to you today. I don't want to give you the same presentation that I've given to you a number of times. Any of you who are in this game, you've heard me speak enough times on the what's coming down the track and what revenue is done. So what I'm just trying to do this time is change it up a little bit for you about what I'm going to cover, and really try and hit the highlights of from our, I don't know if you're aware of the fact that myself and my team have been engaging on a one-to-one basis with the top 20 hauliers into Dublin and Rosslare ports. for the last number of months, and really based on that feedback is what I'm trying to cover here today, where we see there's still open questions and that there's still concerns there. So I suppose first off, like what I would be saying to you is that the approach that is being taken in Ireland is that all of your declarations, for anything that you want customs clear in our ports, you must pre-lodge all of the declarations. And the very simple reason for this is because none of our ferry operators operate temporary storage facilities or anything like that. So you have to pre-lodge because this is the only way we can handle the movement when it comes in. And I suppose really more importantly, that's from a UCC legal perspective side, right? But the other more important thing is, if we want to maintain the just-in-time business model that you currently operate and move your goods under, if we get everything in advance, we can process the declarations and we can have hopefully most of the work done before the goods ever arrive into Ireland. So that's great, Aidan. I see that up there now. So what we're saying to you is you pre-lodge all of your declarations in advance. So we're talking about a safety and security declaration. Now, can we just set aside the exceptions for empty lorries and empty containers and packaging? They're the exceptions. But if we go with the main flow of goods, everything will need a safety and security declaration. If it's a straightforward import, then it's the pre-lodgement of that import declaration. If it's a transit and it's T2 goods, and I'll cover some of that later, it's only a transit. But if it's a T1 transit and you are ending it at the port, you must give us all of the pre-lodged import declarations in advance as well. And when I'm saying this to you is you must, if you want any possibility of getting a green channel on arrival into Ireland, this is the only way that we can support that requirement. So just for information there on the next slide, I mean, if you are involved in moving goods both in and out of Ireland, you'll see there, it's on the next slide, Aidan, like all of the systems that, if you're the person responsible for making the declarations, there's quite a few declaration systems that you need to be able to engage with. So there's ICS, which is your safety and security declaration for inbound goods. There's transit, and what we're talking about there is, so both if you are moving goods outbound out of Ireland, you need to be the authorised consignor and have your transit guarantee. But then if you're a recipient of inbound transits, you need the capacity to interact with transit, to close the transit, and you need to be authorised for temporary storage facility. So if you're involved in export, you need AEP, and you need to be able to interact with that system. And again, there's safety and security risk rules in on that system. And then finally, then the AIS, the import system, as you'll be aware, that's going live, I think it's next week, the week after, yeah, Monday week, I think. And that like has the capacity. So again, you have to be able to interact with those Irish declaration systems. Now, if you are in the space where you are, and what Aidan was saying there about the land bridge, and I'll come on to that a little bit later when I'm talking about transit, you have to bear in mind then that if you are using land bridge, you or somebody acting on your behalf will have to also be able to interact with other member states' safety and security system to be able to put in an entry summary declaration. And whilst the UK government have suspended the operation of safety and security for the first 6 months, once that 6 months is up, you will also then be required to do a safety and security declaration on entry into the UK and when you're exiting the UK. So I'll walk you through like that transit thing later on, but just to be aware, there's an awful lot of systems you need to connect to. So on the next slide there, you'll see, and for any of you that have been involved like with revenue, you'll be aware that like we've built a lot of systems in the background that the trade have no exposure to, and that's to help us manage the traffic in the port and to be aware of everything that's coming in on the ferries, etc. But the other front-facing systems that we've built for are the pre-boarding notification, the channel lookup facility, and a parking self-check-in facility. And they really are the facilitations that we've put into systems to help that just-in-time business model, that RoRo kind of services. So I mean, I'm assuming that all of you have heard about these three systems, so I'm not really going to go into really in-depth detail. But on the next slide, I mean, it's the PBN, it's the virtual envelope, and this is, so what we're saying is that all of the declarations that you submit, that we talked about earlier, so say if you've given us a safety and security declaration and an import declaration, you put the MRNs of those declarations into this pre-boarding notification. Every vehicle or trailer, whether it's empty or full or whatever, has to have a PBN. This is something we've worked on in collaboration with the ferry operators, and they will not allow you, I'll show you that later on, they will not allow you board unless you have a PBN that has a good check-in status. So this virtual envelope or pre-boarding notification, it is similar to the service that will be in operation in France. So again, we're talking about if you're doing land bridge, you will be required to do an SI Brexit going into France, where you will have to have the details of the MRNs to pop into that envelope. And the UK are bringing in, it's called the GBMS, which is the Goods Vehicle Movement System. And for transit, that is in operation, is our understanding that is due to be in operation in all ports from the 1st of January. And we don't know a lot about it because there isn't information available as yet. But what we do know is that you must have a UK ORI number to be able to access GVMS. So you need to go on to HMRC's website, and there's a few steps that you have to take to get a UK ORI number to use that system. And the other important thing from an Irish revenue perspective is that we're using the PBN for both inbound and outbound journeys. So no matter what your role is in the supply chain, if you're only an importer or an exporter, you will be using this pre-boarding notification as the cover that will cover an entire vehicle and have everything that is being carried in that vehicle. There'll be details of that within the pre-boarding notification. So on the next slide there, you'll see, I mean, why did we come along, and why have we all ended up putting in, creating these virtual envelopes? But the reality is that for a lot of movements that move by ferry, there's mixed loads, there's groupage loads, there's multiple players involved on the back of the truck. And like, how is the haulier supposed to know the routing for each of those individual declarations, especially if they're not the party that's making the declarations? So this was a mechanism for us, first of all, to pull together all of the data. But secondly, we had gotten significant feedback after our preparations for Brexit Mark 1 about the amount of change there tends to be to, you intended going on the 9 o'clock sailing and you end up on the 10 o'clock sailing, or a cab has broken down, so the movement goes in a vehicle different than that was declared on the declarations. So we've implemented this to facilitate all of those possibilities arriving. And as I said, I think it most critically and most importantly is that for the haulage company, we are now able to tell you the channel for your vehicle. So you know that no matter how many declarations and parties are involved in the back of the truck, you now have sight of what channel your vehicle is going to be subjected to on disembarkation into Ireland. And I suppose another really critical thing, that it wasn't a reason for doing the PBN, but as a result of doing it, we are now able to create for the trade, once you put in the MRN of the import declarations into the pre-boarding notification, we will create for you the presentation notification, which you would be legally obliged to submit as an electronic message to revenue when the goods arrive in Ireland. So we're just reusing the data and we're fulfilling that obligation for you, as we are allowed to do, the legislation allows to check in. I suppose one of the most important features of the pre-boarding notification is that we have built-in validation rules into the system. So I mean, if you put in an MRN that's kind of has already been used, you'll get a rejection straight away. It'll say it's not a valid PBN or not a valid MRN, etc. We also then have confirmation for you to know whether the PBN will get a good check-in status. So if we look at that really simple example of an import, where you just need a safety and security declaration and an import declaration. So that's the minimum requirement, is two MRNs into that pre-boarding notification. And what that means is then that PBN and therefore that vehicle will get a good check-in status. But it's really important to note that that doesn't mean that the PBN is complete, because if you have 10 importers and there's 10 import declarations, then you must put in the MRNs of all of those import declarations into the pre-boarding notification. So sorry, Aidan, yeah, you were right to go on to the next slide. I'll move on a bit faster. I mentioned already about the good check-in. So you'll see there, that's just a screenshot of what the PBN ID looks like. It's both numeric and it's in a barcode. And you can check it yourself. Anyone who has the PBN ID can go in and check the status of the PBN. And what we're saying is, the driver should always check it before they ever get to the port to make sure they'll be allowed into the port. But importantly as well, in real time, the ferry operators, when the driver pulls up to check in, the ferry operators will interact electronically with revenue. They'll check the PBN status, and if there's a good check-in status, the vehicle will be permitted on board. And this is relevant for both accompanied and unaccompanied. So they'll be permitted to board, but if there's not a good check-in status, they'll be turned back from the port and directed to leave the port. So it's really important, one, that the driver has the PBN with them and that they check it in advance to make sure that they have that good check-in status. Because for both movements, so if you're over in the UK and trying to board a ferry in the UK to come to Ireland, you'll be turned back over there if you don't have a good check-in status. And for movements for exports leaving Ireland, if you go to Dublin or Ross Airport and don't have a good check-in status, you will not be allowed to board the ferry. So on the next slides then, this is just an idea of the kind of channels that will be available. I mentioned the three functions that we've developed on the Customs Ro-Ro service. So the second one of those is the channel lookup, and at 30 minutes out, after we've done as much of the clearances and releases as we can, we will then provide the channel for that vehicle. So a lot of these lads are self-explanatory. I mean, what you will get is, if it's green, if all the declarations on the back of the truck are green, you will get an exit the port. And on the left-hand side there, I've given a display of the signage that will be visible around both Dublin and Rosslare ports. So there'll be an exit the port. If you're carrying live animals, you'll get your channel will be that icon with the truck, with the commercial truck with the horses on the back of it. We've tried to use icons because of language challenges with language, etc. And in Dublin, then I think it's Yard 2 that they go into that straight after the IUPT, and there'll be signage and everything directing. And we're using the same signage on our IT systems as will be displayed on the signage around Dublin Port. If you get a transit, the initial signage will direct you it'll be the icon with T7. If it's a seal check, it'll be the customs officer icon with T7. And if you get a call to customs, it will be the icon and you'll be directed to T11, which I think is the old Bond Drive extension in Dublin Port. Now, if you come in through Rosslare, you'll see that on the next slide then. It's slightly different again in Rosslare in that everything is directed to the Kilran site for now. So again, the green channel will be exit the port, but if you're carrying live animals, you'll be into Kilran and there'll be signage within the site to travel over to the live animal BCP. If you are a transit, you'll be coming into the Kilran site and you'll be directed into the transit lane. And if it's a seal check, you'll be directed into the seal lane. But then if you have a call to customs, you'll be directed into the parking up area, and that's where you'll be directed to. I just want to divert slightly here then on the next slide about the transits and how we're going to manage them. Now, for any of you that are moving transits to a temporary storage facility, so they can be either T1 or T2 transits. If you are moving them to an inland temporary storage facility and not ending the transit in the port, then there's a role called Office of Transit in Operation. For any of you who ever go through Switzerland, you'll be familiar with that function. So what we've done now, based on your pre-boarding notification, so once you put the MRN of the transit into your pre-boarding notification, there'll be no need for the driver to come anywhere near customs to scan that barcode. We will use the detail from the pre-boarding notification, and we will fulfill this obligation of Office of Transit digitally. So that means there are absolutely no delays and no interaction for those movements coming in. If you are moving T2 transit, so this would be the land bridge stuff that's coming from, say, France, you're coming through, and if you have indicated on that transit that you're going to end the transit in Dublin Port or Rosslare Port, and if that transit movement has been green routed, so therefore, and I mean, that's 99.9% of these movements will be green routed, but say if our colleagues on the agriculture side want to need to do an intervention, or for any reason, if customs or any of the agencies want to intervene, but if the transit has been given a green routing, well then those transits will be ended digitally by revenue. And again, what that means is we will use the information in the PBN and we will digitally close those transits. So again, there is no need for those drivers to come in to the compounds in either Dublin or Rosslare. They will drive straight out of the port. So it's critically important that the driver always checks the channel for every movement that they're bringing in. And in this instance, when a driver carrying T2 goods sees the green, they know that they can exit the port. So that's a considerable facilitation and development that we've introduced since last time out. But when I'm talking about, just when we're on the subject then of transit, just to kind of explain to you that if you are using land bridge for an outbound movement, you are submitting a safety and security declaration and it combined with the transit into Ireland. You are doing a PBN, you're creating that, and you're putting the MRN of that transit into the PBN. That's your Irish obligations met, right? You then have obligations in the UK to interact with GVMS. I mentioned already you have to have a YORI number. To do that, you put the MRN of the transit into that GVMS. You then, presumably you board the ferry and you get off, say, in Holyhead or Pembroke or whatever, you drive across. So let's go with the fact that you're going to France, right? And as Aidan mentioned already, you have to do the PENT pass. You have to get the pass to get into there. You have to complete the SI Brexit, where you are scanning in the barcode of the transit to inform French customs that you're coming in. And you also need to submit a safety and security declaration into French, the French system. So then on arrival into France, if you are not going to an authorized, a temporary storage facility, our understanding is that the nearest to Calais is you have to go to Bologna to end that transit. So revenue is doing up diagrams and maps to show the complexity of the land bridge route, and there are different procedures in each of the 3 countries that are the normal countries that we go to, France, Belgium and the Netherlands. There's different obligations in each of those 3 countries. So as you can see, if you're bringing goods in by land bridge into the Irish side, whilst there's all those systems to interact with, and there's the SI Brexit, there's the GVMS twice, and then there's the PBN on our side, at least we've done a little bit of facilitation on ending the transits, that it's all done digitally. So just on the next slide, and I'm just coming to an end now, is I mentioned the third bit of function. We've done 3 bits of functionality on the customs Ro-Ro service. We have a driver, a parking self check-in. So for any driver that's given an icon with a customs in Dublin, as I said, they're directed to T11. In Rosslare, they're directed to park up, but they're all just told about parking up. And we are strongly advocating that rather than come into our offices, that the driver uses the parking self check-in. And again, they just use the PBN ID to do that. They just copy and paste that in to the check-in screen, and they give us they indicate what parking bay number they're in. They give us their mobile telephone number and what kind of vehicle they have. So again, there'll be images up to display those vehicle types, whether I think they're curtain siders or dock lifters or whatever. And what happens then when the driver does that is, if they're carrying, say, like an ATA carnet or another paper declaration, they'll simply be told, come into the office, because obviously you have to come in and we have to stamp them. But if, for instance, say the vehicle has been, one of the declarations has been routed orange and we haven't received in the supporting declarations, the message for that driver will be, supporting documents outstanding, please await further instruction. And when those supporting documents are submitted, and if that movement is released, the driver will get a text message from us to say your channel has been updated to green and you can leave the port. And then I suppose really the most important one of those then is more, if you've been called to customs because you're getting a physical inspection, the driver will receive a text message telling them what inspection area to go to as soon as the next bay is available. So I suppose we're trying to, especially in COVID times, to minimize that face-to-face interaction, and we're actively encouraging the trade to avail of this parking self-check-in, so we can just communicate electronically with the driver and direct them to where they need to go. So just to wrap up then, I mean, our final message to the trade the whole time is, you need to pre-lodge all of your customs declarations, get them in early, share the MRNs with whoever is doing up your pre-boarding notification, and then we have some hope of being able to kind of maintain as much as possible that just-in-time business model that ferry trade needs to operate. So that's it, Aidan. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Caroline. That was very, very informative, and I do appreciate this is kind of evolving as we go along, but I think considerable new and fresh information here, and certainly very beneficial to see and hear that. So I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions in relation to it. I'm going to pass on straight away now to Noreen Galvin.
Perfect.
And there you are, Noreen. I am going to pin you. And if you can see if you can share your screen.
Yeah, is that working?
I can see. Let me see.
Yeah, Noreen, I can see it clear. You're in
Okay.
port control processes. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Grand. Okay, wow. Well, on top of all that customs info, let's go on to the import controls process that applies to importing animals, products of animal origin, plant and plant products, on top of all the customs work that you have to do. So I suppose I'm going to aim this talk mainly at your industry, the haulage industry. Some of the other points will refer mainly to your clients, the importers, or to the person responsible for the consignment, which we'll mention in a minute. If you need more information on anything that I haven't covered, just come back to us and we can provide that, no problem. So just as an introduction, currently under EU regulations, all live animals, products and products of animal origin, including fishery products, plants and plant products that are imported into the EU from third countries require import control checks at the border control post of entry into the EU. So border control post in Ireland would be Dublin Port, Rosslare Port, and then Dublin Airport and Shannon Airport. From the 1st of January, these controls will apply to these products being imported from Great Britain, regardless of whether there is an EU-UK trade deal. And these checks are mandatory, and they aim to reduce the risk to human, animal and plant health from the import of products from third countries into the EU. Now, so what is the import controls process, and how does it relate to you and the person that's carrying those goods from the UK into Ireland? So the process consists of 3 phases: the documentary check phase, an identity check, and then a physical check. Physical checks does not occur on 100% of all consignments. They have various rates, and we'll mention that shortly. So from the point of view for the haulier, what do you need to ask your client, the importer? What you need to ask them now is, will the product that you are going to be carrying, the product that's subject to import controls, will it be certified prior to loading? And what we mean by that is all products of animal origin, all live animals, require a health certificate prior to leaving the UK. That health certificate is issued by the competent authority in the UK, so in this scenario, DEFRA, and it's issued by an official, an authorized agent or an official veterinarian. So you need to make sure that any products that you're carrying that require these import control checks, that they have been certified. And plant products, they are certified using what's called a phyto certificate, a phytosanitary certificate. Another question to ask your client: when you're picking up at the UK address, is there the option of having a competent authority seal applied to the back of your trailer? Okay, and not every shipment, not every load is applicable for a seal, and we'll talk about that later. And you'll see the benefits of having a seal applied to your load when we get to the identity checks. The other thing that you need to think about is, what if when you arrive at the border control post, for whatever reason the consignment is rejected? You need to talk to your client, the importer, now about how they, or the operator responsible for the consignment, is going to deal with these rejections. Now, who is this infamous operator responsible for the consignment? Well, this is a person that's really important in the import controls process between third countries and EU. Okay, this person, it can be the importer themselves, or it can be an agent acting on their behalf, and these agents are sometimes also customs agents, or it can be a logistics company, and perhaps your company is going to become a operator responsible for the consignment. So this person or this company must register with the Department of Agriculture first, and then this will facilitate their registration on Traces for this activity type. Now, Traces is the EU import control platform, okay? And you must be registered up there as operator responsible for the consignment. And the responsibilities of this person are that they need to have access to all the necessary paperwork. So they need to have access to the health certificate, a copy of the health certificate, which they would get from the UK supplier. They need to have access to a copy of the packing list, an invoice, etc. And then they need to pre-notify the border control post of entry, so let's say Dublin Port, on Traces 24 hours in advance by generating a common health entry document for each consignment on board that load. So that's the most important thing to remember, is that they need to pre-notify us 24 hours in advance. And once they have generated the common health entry document on Traces, they will submit documents then to the Department of Agriculture through an online portal, which we'll talk about in a minute, 24 hours in advance. And we'll see the importance of this 24 hours and these documents also. And the main point to remember is that the operator responsible for the consignment is the contact point for the staff at the border control post that have any queries on any of the documentation that has been submitted. And remember, these documents are being submitted in order for us to carry out a documentary check. So a copy of the health cert, the shed, and any supporting documents. We'll also need a SAD number, which will become available to you nearer the time. You won't have a 24 hours, they won't have a 24 hours in advance. We appreciate that. And all these documents are lodged via an online portal, which will be launched shortly, and all registered operators responsible for the consignment will receive details of how to access it. Now, the one important point for the haulier, for the driver, is that the original health certificate must travel with the load. So when you're picking up your load of product of animal origin, your live animals, or any products that are subject to import controls, the health certificate must travel with the load. Okay, so you'll bring it from the UK suppliers and you'll present it to us at the border control post at the time of inspection. If you are carrying plant and plant products, the phyto certificate that we mentioned recently, the original does not need to travel with the load. And that is because in some scenarios for plant and plant products, you will not, they will only require documentary check, and therefore they wouldn't require a further check, and you wouldn't be able to drop the original to the border control post. So that's just a slight difference in the certificates. So once that operator responsible for the consignment has submitted all the documents, so they have a health certificate, the health certificate was generated, the documents have been forwarded to the operator responsible for the consignment, who has then forwarded them to us. This allows us to carry out the documentary check. And the idea of this is that we do this prior to the load arriving at the border control post. So it's done by the time you arrive, it's probably done maybe even before you leave the site in the UK. And the idea is that if we find any discrepancies or any issues that need to be resolved, we can contact the operator responsible for the consignment and try and get these ironed out before you arrive at the border control post, before you arrive at Dublin Port, so that you're not asked to park up and wait. So all of the consignments of products of animal origin need a documentary check. Remember that they need a health certificate, okay? And we carry out the checks on the health certificate, the sheds, and all the supporting documents to make sure that A, the health certificate is correct, that it's been filled out correctly, that the supporting documents mirror the metrics of the supporting documents, the amount, the metrics of it mirror the amount that's been certified on the health cert, and that the details on the shed are correct. If you're bringing in fishery products, there will also be a requirement for SFPA verification to make sure that it fulfills the IUU regulations. Again, as I mentioned, any queries are directed to the operator responsible for the consignment. So ideally, these are completed based on the copies of the paperwork. These are completed before you even arrive at the port. And once this is done, we will then assign the load to a further check. So an ID check only, or an ID and physical check. So just a point to remember again is that for some plant and plant products, so if you're carrying a load of plant and plant products only, it's not a mixed load, they have a documentary check, and some of them do not require a further ID or physical check. So you may get a green routing if you are carrying only plant or plant products. If you're carrying plant products of animal origin, you won't get a green routing. They always require further checks, either an identity and a physical check. And customs will feed into our system, or our system will feed into customs, and you'll receive your routing via customs. So as Caroline showed you, you'll receive your proceed to T7 seal check routing for products of animal origin, or if you're carrying live animals, proceeds to live animal BIP. So that's the importance of checking with your client, the importer, that A, the products you're about to pick up have been certified, and ensuring that the person, the operator responsible for the consignment, has submitted them the correct documents in a timely fashion. They've done their traces work and they've submitted them to the DAFN portal, which means that we can do our documentary checks so that when you get off the ferry, your routing is, or before you get off the ferry, your routing is available and you can proceed without having to wait for further paperwork issues to be sorted. So then an identity check. Now, we mentioned briefly about checking with your client, the importer, if there would be the option of a competent authority seal to be placed on your load. So this is a seal that's placed by DEFRA, or the Animal Plant Health Agency in the UK. Now, they can only seal a load that is completely filled in one site, because the seal number, as you see there on the seal, the alphanumeric code or the numeric code, must also be included on every health certificate for every consignment within that load. And then the seal is placed on the load when it's loaded up and sealed up, so that we know that what's in the health for the consignments that are in the lorry, the health certificates for those cross match and match up with the seal that's on the lorry. So the seal check is carried out in T7. We cross-reference the seal number with the original health certificates for that load. So we'll get the health certificates from the driver at that point. The seal must be intact, so don't tamper with the seal. The seal has to be intact for verification purposes. It underpins the whole process of a seal check. And this is a really efficient form of identity check. So if your load has not been picked for a physical check and it only requires an identity check and you have a competent authority seal on your load, then this is a really efficient way of completing your import controls process. But as we mentioned, not every load is suitable for a seal. So if we don't have a seal, or if there are some documentary errors or there's some discrepancies on the paperwork, even on a seal load, we can ask that the load be subject to a full identity check. So in this scenario, the trailers put on the loading bay. So for plant products, it would be Terminal 9 in Dublin Port, or for products of animal origin, it'll be Terminal 10 in Dublin Port. So the trailer is put onto a loading bay, and the load is turned out. So the degree of unloading will be proportional to the amount of consignments on board. So for each consignment, we have paperwork for each consignment. We have a health cert for each consignment. So we need to cross-reference the information on the health certificate on the shed with each consignment on board. So as you can see, the image on the bottom right is of a very simple load. It's of a one commodity entire load on pallets. It's very easy to do a physical or an identity check on that. On the loads that will be coming from the UK, these will be very different. They'll be mixed, they'll be retailer loads, but it's just to understand the reason why we have to partially turn them out, the reason why we have to get access to each consignment is to complete the identity check. So physical check, so the rate of physical check, it varies with the type of product being imported. So it's usually proportional to the risk that is deemed that product poses to human or animal health. So most of the products of animal origin for human consumption will have a physical check rate of 15% or 30%. And what we mean by that is, so fresh meat, so has a 15% physical check rate. So 15% of all fresh beef that comes through Dublin Port or any BCP in any 1 year, 15% of those consignments would need to have a physical check. Fresh poultry has a 30% check rate, fresh milk has a 30% check rate. So the physical check rate again varies with the product being imported. So the physical check again is done in T10. It's the lorry is put on, you're reversed onto a loading bay, the doors are opened. And again, the load is partially turned out. The degree of unloading is proportional to the number of consignments present and the consignment that we have to get access to. So if we need to get access to the fresh chicken, for example, and it's all the way loaded first, then that's going to pose just a time delay. It's not insurmountable, but it's just a delay that you need to be prepared for. So so the physical check, it comprises of obviously a full identity check. So we're checking the labels, we're checking the weights, the metrics, we're checking that it is what it says it is. And then to complete the physical check, we'll take a certain amount of each consignment. So let's say it's 3 or 4 boxes into the physical inspection room. We'll open them, we'll weigh them, we'll make sure that they are of a standard for human consumption, that they're fit for entry into the EU. And then some consignments are subject to sampling. So if they're being sampled for microbiological criteria or for residue sampling, this would be done at the time of physical sampling. And once this has been completed, your load is reloaded and the trailer is closed up. Now, at the end of the process, at the end of our documentary check and our identity check or a documentary check and a physical check, if all the checks are deemed satisfactory, we'll accept the load and it's free to enter the EU. So what we do is we go into traces, we go into the common health entry document that the operator responsible for the consignment generated in the first place, and we finalize it. So we validate it. If all is well, we accept it. Customs were informed of this, and then the consignment or the load is free to leave the BCP. Obviously, if there's 20 consignments on one load, which there could easily be, if you have 20 different commodities, 20 health certs, you have 20 consignments, then we have to validate 20 sheds. The consignment and the load is free to leave the BCP. Then just slightly on a negative note, rejection. So if the load does not, if it's deemed not compliant at any stage of the import controls process, then it is not free to enter the EU, okay, and it's deemed to be non-compliant. Now, the most common reasons for non-compliance were documentary errors in 2017. So 2/3 of the reasons for rejection were due to documentary errors. So this kind of underpins the importance of you ensuring that you are carrying goods that have been certified, goods that have been certified correct. Now, it's obviously not on you to make sure that the certification is correct, but the goods are certified, that the documents have been submitted by the operator responsible for the consignment, and this will go a long way towards being compliant. So what are the options for a rejected consignment or a rejected load? Well, it can be returned to the country of origin, and that is something that I think the importer and the UK supplier will have to have decided prior to the 1st of January what's going to happen, because it's not as simple as turning around and bringing it back. It's not as simple from a logistics point of view, but equally the UK's border control posts, or wherever it's going to be, wherever it's going to enter the UK, if it's Holyhead, whatever, needs to be notified, and they have their system called IPAFs, and actually it has to be notified on IPAFs. And because we are in Ireland, none of us have access to it, so you need to have talked with your UK supplier about whether they could put it up on IPAFs for them. So there's a little bit to talk about around rejections. So definitely have that conversation. Now, there are fees for this, but these fees are paid by the operator responsible for the consignment, and obviously would be passed on to their importer, their clients. There's fees per consignment, so there's fees for the import controls process in general, and they're done per consignment. And then there would be fees for, in the case of rejection, where there's storage fees, or where there is destruction fees. The thing about products of animal origin is that in order to destroy them, they have to be incinerated. They're incinerated due to the risk to animal and health. So this is expensive. So just some key points to take home. And again, I reiterate the fact that I suppose I aim this at the haulage industry. If any of you out there are operators responsible for the consignment or want to know more about it, come back to me. If you're importers and you need more information, come back to me. So key points: ensure that all products that require SPS checks or import controls have been certified prior to you picking them up in the UK. Ensure the necessary paperwork has been submitted in the correct time frame. This is the role of the operator responsible for the consignment, and it's a really important role. And while it's not up to you to decide who it is, it's up to the importer to decide who their operator responsible for the consignment is. It's just to reiterate the importance of it. And just because you have a customs declarant, it doesn't automatically mean that they are this person, because it's a specific role and they need to be registered on traces for it. Then what can you do as a haulier? Assess your freight presentation. So if the option of a competent authority seal is available, I would take it. Because it's a very efficient way of going through the identification process. And remember, the seal can be applied to a single or a multi-consignment load, as long as the seal number is included on every health certificate for every consignment that is on board. And also, just to understand, as we explained about the full identity checks and the physical checks, it's just to understand that the groupage of mixed load, by their nature and their packing, their complexity, they're slower to process due to the fact that we need to unload them to actually access each consignment that's on board. So I think that's it. Any queries, I will forward my slides to Aidan as a PDF, and he can share them, and there's links there with several information. But any queries, just please get on to us or contact Aidan, and he'll get on to me directly. Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much, Noreen.
No problem.
Very detailed, informative presentation, and I see there's questions coming in. So in terms of maintaining our timing schedule here, I will pass over to Carol Lynch from Declare On now, and I am logging the calls that are there in the chat, and we'll put them to everybody after Carol's presentation. So if I could ask. is Carol there? Okay.
I can't see
right.
Carol. Oh, she's there now. Yeah.
Is she?
Well, I mean, her icon is there hidden.
Yeah. I think Carol's on mute, but if she's available to come in, I think what we might do while we're waiting is maybe ask a couple of questions. Just to get going, I think maybe from revenue and agriculture's perspective, like what approach will you guys be taking from the 1st of January in relation to compliance? Because I do appreciate we're mandated to abide by all of these rules, but that there's an awful lot of learning to happen. And just I see Carol's back here now, so we might come back to the question, and I can get your.
You're on mute, Carol.
You're on mute, Carol. She's having trouble there with the. Can you hear us, Carol? No problem.
Okay. Sorry, I'm having problems. Yeah, I'm having problems with. Do you want to take another question? Well, I'm going to have to restart my computer. It's literally just crashed as I was starting on the presentation.
Okay. Okay. But maybe if I could go back to Caroline and Noreen then, and just, you know, from a pragmatic perspective, from the 1st of January, what will the approach be from Revenue and Department of Agriculture?
Well, I mean, we've been saying all along, Aidan, that I mean, the requirement is, and we've been saying it now for however many years, that on day one, trade must submit their import declarations, and that position remains the position. Obviously, if people have made genuine errors on declarations, and from that learning curve perspective, but I mean, and Revenue will have 24/7 support on phone lines and by email and everything available from the 1st of January to assist with trade encountering any difficulty. But from the actual procedural requirements of having to submit declarations, that is a full requirement from the 1st of January to cover all movements. Errors within that, obviously there's a degree of leniency and a flexibility and pragmatism about that, but the requirement would still remain.
Great, thanks, Caroline. And Noreen, would you have anything to add?
Yeah. I think we don't have the luxury of what the UK, I suppose, are doing. They're having a phased implementation of their requirements when you're moving stuff from EU into the UK. We are, you know, we have to have some day one compliance. We're bound by the EU regulations for the health and safety, etc., health of the public health, the animal health, animal welfare, etc. So no, I think I'd like to say we'd be pragmatic, and perhaps when it comes down to it, we will have to show some leniency for genuine errors that are made in good faith and are part of the learning progress, you know, for everybody. But look, we've been messaging now for 2 years, and of course, you know, there still is time for things to change, not significantly. You will still require, you know, regardless of what trade deal is discussed, we will still require documentary checks, identity checks. So they will require certification. So, you know, maybe some basic clerical errors that we can, you know, as part of the learning curve, but we have to impose from day one the import controls process as is EU regulation.
Okay, I mean, I think that's a stark message to us all. We need to pay heed for sure, but look, I think we'll come back to the questions, and thanks, Noreen. Caroline. Carol Lynch is back, so we will, you're ready to go there. If you can share your video, that'd be great.
Yeah, just having IT problems, definitely. So share screen, there we go, and 2020. Share. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yes, we can, yeah.
Great, sorry about that. Typically
No problem.
collapses just as I'm going online.
No worries.
So I just check, Aidan, how are we on time? So I don't go over
Yeah, look, I think
too
if,
much.
yeah, look, 15, 20 minutes, we're good.
Great, okay. Okay, so hi everybody. So what I'm going to talk about today is to follow up on Caroline and Noreen's instructions from the revenue side, the Department of Agriculture side, to just kind of build on that again and support what they're saying in terms of preparation and making sure all the information is correct that's being submitted to revenue and to the department. And I think the really critical points there that Noreen also mentioned was about the quality of the data. And anybody who's heard me speak on this before knows that I'm always talking about the quality of the information and the quality of the data that's going to be submitted to revenue in order to ensure the goods can clear customs efficiently. Because if the wrong information goes through, that's more likely to cause a delay, and it's going to cause revenue and the department to have to check the declarations. So I'm not going to go through this. As we know, Brexit ends on the transition ends on 31st December, and the transition period has been in place for the last 11 months for everybody to be ready. We are looking at compliance requirements coming into effect on 1 January, as we know, and the only thing we don't really know at this point is the outcome of the current talks. Unfortunately, this morning, as Aidan mentioned earlier, the talks they seem to have taken a bad turn again, so they're not looking great. But I'm not going to talk about the customs duties that much in terms of the trade agreement talks. It's really more on the compliance requirements. So in terms of preparation, really, what are we telling our clients at this point in BDO and in Declaran? And I'm going to cover this from two aspects. Firstly, from what you need to have in place in order to ensure you are compliant from 1 January. And then the information that you will need to give to a customs clearance agent such as Declaran to be able to lodge those declarations on your behalf. So when we look at preparing for Brexit, the first thing that everybody needs to ensure they have in place is an EORI. And I know you've probably heard this from me, from the revenue, from the government, over and over and over again, but there does still seem to be quite a number of companies who haven't applied for their EORI registration. So if you haven't applied for that, you do need to do that as a matter of urgency. You'll need to have a EORI in Ireland if you're acting as the importer into Ireland or the exporter from Ireland. And if you're acting as the importer into Great Britain, you will need to have a GB EORI too. So we're getting a lot of questions as to whether you need both the GB EORI and the current Irish EORI, and the answer to that is pretty much yes if you're acting as an importer into the UK or an exporter out of the UK. You also need to be VAT registered if you're importing into Ireland. And again, one big issue that's coming up a lot with clients at the moment is VAT registration requirements for importing into the UK. So if you have a customer who is exporting to the UK, they will need to be VAT registered in order to be able to export to the UK if they're supplying on a delivered duty paid basis. So for everybody who's here, I suppose really what the issue is not only how our customers prepared and how are you prepared if you are moving your own goods, but also how are your customers prepared if they're coming to you to find out how should declarations be lodged. And I do want to emphasize that the customs declaration process is quite complicated, so it shouldn't be underestimated. When you're lodging a customs declaration with the revenue, you are lodging a tax declaration. So it's important to understand what is the information that is on that declaration. And it's important that your customers, if they're giving the information to you, are giving all the accurate information so that there is no liability that could come back on you. So we're telling everybody to make sure they understand the declaration itself. There's 54 items of information that need to be entered on that declaration in relation to the consignor and the consignee. That's kind of the straightforward one in many ways. I'm going to talk about the declarant in a minute, but also the tariff classification of goods and the value of goods, the origin of goods. And in terms of tariff classification, when you complete a customs declaration, the importer or exporter, who is the declarant, needs to provide the customs classification details. So an agent should never take that responsibility on, or you could leave yourself open with a liability. You also need to, you need to have a clearance agent in place, and that can be yourselves, or it could be the customer themselves. I say, a lot of people discuss, well, whether they should take the customs declarations in-house and self-file. And the one thing I'd say about that is, again, just going back to what I said at the beginning, it's a complicated process. Lodging a customs declaration is not simply filling out a form. You are giving quite a substantial amount of information to the revenue, and you're standing over the accuracy of that information. So you need to be fully trained in completing the declaration. You also need to understand when routings come back from revenue, what the routing request is, and you need to be able to interact with the revenue in relation to any customs audits or checks. So training is an absolute essential. And if anybody is kind of entering this area, they absolutely, this is like, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to be fully trained. And I know, Aidan, that you run training courses for hauliers, and that's critical. Absolutely no question that you must be trained in order to complete any customs declarations. There's also a lot of complexities around the declaration, and I'm trying to kind of address this, I suppose, both from a company's perspective and from a haulage perspective. And when you are completing a customs declaration, you're looking to see who's the consignor, so who's shipping the goods, and who's receiving the goods, who's the consignee. But that is not always as straightforward as it seems, because if a company is selling goods on a delivered duty paid basis, then they may be both the consignor and the consignee, or the customer could be the consignee. But it also doesn't mean who's actually responsible for the declaration is another matter altogether. So there's a lot of complexity in identifying the different actors to the arrangement. So we're looking to see who is the consignor or exporter, who is the consignee or importer, who is the declarant. And the declarant, which I do want to discuss in just a minute, is really critical, and maybe not necessarily understood how important it is to identify the correct declarant, and to ensure that you haven't taken on any additional liabilities by being a declarant that you're not aware of. So we have a lot of work going on at the moment in relation to identifying those details with contracts and talking to vendors and suppliers to identify who will act as importer, who will act as exporter. A huge issue that's come up is in terms of being established for customs purposes. So if you have a company, let's say you have a UK company who is importing into Ireland, and they are not established in Ireland, they're a UK company, but they have an Irish VAT registration. That does not mean, because they have a VAT registration, that they're established. So if they're not established in Ireland, the person who lodges the declaration takes on the liability for that declaration. So by acting on behalf of a non-Irish established entity, a UK entity, we're talking non-EU here, by acting on behalf of a UK entity who isn't established in Ireland, you become jointly and severally liable for the duties and the VAT and the accuracy of the declaration. So it's, again, going back to the responsibility of the declarant, this could be a critical issue. It would be a critical issue if anything went wrong. In addition, again, we'll take the situation of a UK company who is importing and selling to an Irish company, and they're delivering, and it's on a delivered duty paid basis. That company needs to be registered for VAT in Ireland. And a lot of UK companies are not familiar with that, or have not been aware of that. It takes 6 to 8 weeks to register for VAT at the moment in Ireland, so we're really at the end zone in terms of making those applications. In addition, as Nori mentioned, you have the responsibility for the consignment. Who's the person responsible for the consignment and responsible for ensuring that the consignment is presented to the Department of Agriculture, and that they can contact in relation to the health certs and the licenses. So all these lead to a huge, I'm not going to go into the new procedures, and Carol Ann covered those in depth, so that gave us a really good indication of what's going to happen from 1st of January. But obviously there are new procedures. So what I'm really focusing on is the kind of the mechanics of lodging a customs declaration. So if I try and split it into two aspects, and if we take first of all that you are moving your own loads, and you are lodging your customs declarations, then you're acting as the declarant. And on the other hand, the other half of the people here are for people who are in the haulage industry. You have a customer who's asking you how are they going to lodge the declaration, and can you lodge it on their behalf? And in that case, you're lodging the declaration on your customer's behalf, and you need to be very careful of the liability that you're taking on. If we look at the impact in Ireland, declarations are expected to increase from 1.6 million to 20 million in Ireland, and by 215 million in the UK. So there's going to be a substantial increase in the number of declarations, and this goes back again to the quality of the data. When you look at that number of increase, and the fact that there are going to be a lot of trucks at the ports, and some are going to have this completed correctly, some are not. Inevitably, if the declaration is not completed accurately, that is going to cause you a delay. So in order to minimize those delays, those customs declarations need to be spot on, they need to be accurate, and they need to be completed completely in compliance with customs regulations. We've got transits. I'm not going to cover that here today. I think that Caroline covered that very well. We've got 92,000 new traders entering the net, the customs net, and that's that's going to be obviously a substantial change in the profile of who are importing and exporting. At the moment, if we look at the ports, we have a fairly open economy, and the goods move through the ports very easily. But a lot of those move through companies who are registered as authorised economic operator. And probably about 80%, I think, of goods shipped would be by authorised economic operators. And that's obviously going to change next year when we get a huge new number of companies who are now lodging declarations. And we've got the inevitable projected shortage of agents in Ireland. So we're looking at a shortage of about 3,000 on the Irish side and about 50,000 on the UK side. So I'm sure the pressure is definitely coming on from your customers to lodge those declarations on their behalf, because of the difficulty in getting an agent. But it's just something that needs to be very seriously considered. So who should lodge a customs declaration? In general, it's the owner of the goods or the person acting on their behalf. So what that really means in practice is a company lodges the declaration. They are the importer or they are the exporter. They might do it themselves, they might self-file, but in most cases in Ireland, they're going to look for an agent to act on their behalf. So that representation can be either direct, where you're acting in the name of and on behalf of another person, or indirect, where you're acting in your own name, but on behalf of the other person. A very critical distinction between these two types of representations is in a direct representation, the importer or exporter remains liable for the declaration unless you as an agent completed it incorrectly, in which case the liability comes back to you. In an indirect representative, you're jointly and severally liable. So this is where it becomes an issue for non-established entities. If you have as I said, going back to our example of a UK company who requests a load to be picked up and brought over to Ireland and a declaration to be lodged in Ireland, if they are not established in Ireland, and a VAT registration does not mean that you're established. If you're not established in Ireland, then the person lodging the declaration becomes jointly and severally liable for that. So it's not something to be undertaken lightly, and it's important to understand what your obligations are when you enter this arena. The debtor, I'm not going to go to details of this. I just put it there just for further information for anybody who needs to know. The debtor is normally the declarant, but it's also, as I said, in the case of indirect representation, also the person who makes the declaration on behalf of the other person. And the debtor, again, important to understand, the debtor is anybody who was required to fulfill the obligation concerned, who was aware or should reasonably have been aware that that obligation was not fulfilled, and who acted on behalf of the person who was obliged to fulfill the obligation. So quite a broad range of areas in which case you can be held responsible. This is the document that causes all the trouble, and it doesn't look like this anymore. It's first of all went through a computerized process, so all the green boxes were removed, and it's a lot more difficult to read. But now from mid-November, we will have a further iteration of that in the AIS system for imports, and it remains in AEP for exports. So some of the critical boxes here, which just highlighting the kind of the key ones from a customs perspective, are, as I say, to talk, who's the consigner, who's the consignee, not always as straightforward as it looks. Who's the declarant? So this is the person in box 14. This is the person who signs their name to say that this declaration is completed accurately. And in that box 14, you will put both your name and the type of representation that you are engaged in. So it'll either be 1, I'm acting on my own behalf, 2, I'm acting on behalf of my customer, or 3, I'm acting as an indirect representative and jointly and severally liable. So this box here, for anybody who's completing a declaration, is possibly the most important in terms of future liability. You need to complete the mode of transport, the packaging and description, that's fine. Box 44 is probably one of the most complicated areas. All the licenses and details surrounding the shipment from a customs perspective will be entered in here. And there's quite a number of different data elements that you will signify what is happening. So you can really read the declaration from box 44. The calculation of taxes will be entered in box 47, and that'll happen automatically. On the other side, you have the delivery terms. Is it delivered duty paid, ex works, or CIF, or delivered at place? So 11 different Incoterms that need to, one of them needs to go in there, and that again will determine part of the liability and the consignee details and valuation details. Currency and the invoice amount, and that obviously presumes that it is an invoice. If there's no invoice, you need an invoice for customs purposes. The commodity code, probably again one of the most essential aspects of customs, and it's very important for companies. We're telling all our clients to ensure that they have reviewed all their products and assigned a customs classification code to each product. So everything that's going to be imported, every item that's on that container or in that pallet needs to be declared to customs under the tariff classification applicable to it. We've got the country of origin codes, where do the goods originate, and there are very specific rules with regard to that. That becomes even more critical if we do have a free trade agreement, because in the event of a free trade agreement, and if a company wants to avail of the benefits of that trade agreement, they need to confirm that they comply with the origin criteria. And that will be by means of, traditionally an origin declaration, the EU01 declaration. Sometimes it's an invoice declaration, sometimes it's a REX authorization. But either way, it's a very formal process. And in order to qualify for the preferential trade agreement, you need to ensure, or the company needs to ensure, that they've met the rule of origin applicable to the goods that they're manufacturing, and that they have that authorization from revenue. Then you have your weight details, your preference codes, procedure code. That's, again, the customer will say whether it's going to be an import to free circulation, an import to a customs warehouse, or processing, or some other data. So you can see there quite a lot of information, and part of completing a declaration, whether you're doing it yourself or whether you're doing it on behalf of someone else, is to understand each of those items and understand the information that you're submitting. And then signature, electronic signature down there in the bottom right-hand corner. But probably for the purposes of anybody, again, I'm just trying to kind of focusing on the audience, you're going to have, either you're moving your own goods or you're moving goods on behalf of someone else. This box 14, the declarant, is critical, because this is the one that could bounce back at you if you're the declarant and this declaration is completed incorrectly. I'm saying that, and the fact that we have a shortage of agents, what's the solution? So in BDO, we joined forces with Fexco, who's one of our leading fintech companies in the country, and we have a customs clearance agency called Declaran, which we partnered with the Freight Transport Association to provide services to your members on definitely, in terms of access, obviously on a preferential basis, because at the end of the day, there's still only so many spaces available. So if you require a customs clearance agent, then hopefully you would use Declaran, as I said, because we are working with Aidan on this area. And well, hopefully as part of the training, we'll train you on this also a little bit more in more detail. But what are we doing with Declaron? We're saying to you to, if you have customers who are looking for declarations to be completed and you're not comfortable to do it yourself, but your customer needs it done, please do contact us and we can ensure that the declaration is prepared for you. If you're moving your own goods and you don't want to take it in-house and you're struggling with an agent, again, please contact us and we will provide the clearance service to you. So it's come from a combination of ourselves and BGO and the customs expertise that we have and the fintech capability and experience of Fexco. So we've tried to make it as user-friendly and as IT savvy as possible, so that we're working with a 21st century service opportunity. So again, very similar to what you'd see in SaaS type models. You get a combination of both the customs software that you can access so that you can give us your information really quickly, and so it's not email backwards and forwards, and the customs clearance support service and consultancy service to work through the declaration with you and to address any queries then that are raised by revenue once that declaration is submitted. So given the registration details there, how does it work? You as a company a company would register their details and pay a once-off setup fee. And the reason for that is what we're trying to do here is ensure that as much of the customs information is prepared and reviewed in advance of 1 January. So on the portal, we will have a product master table, a product master kind of section where companies will upload their products. We'll have tariff classifications, origins, as much of the customs information pre-prepared and pre-ready to go. So that's probably one of the most essential parts, and it's like maybe a difference to a traditional agent where you would operate on a day-by-day basis. We are getting this information together and doing the sense check on it and making sure everybody understands what needs to go in to customs in advance of 1 January. Then that gets set up on the customs portal and we get to 1 January. And at that point, you're submitting then the shipping details. So we will work with you as the hauliers to ensure that we have the shipping details, and that will then be submitted. So all the company's doing at the point of 1 January on, ideally, is actually providing the shipping details. So we're pre-populating a lot of the customs declarations and hoping to move then to only having to upload the actual shipping details. Now, nothing ever works quite as simply as that. But that is the plan. You're going to have differences on the day, or products that haven't been classified, or new versions of products. So that's where you need the customs clearance experience and the customs expertise. We're designed to give you the highest chance of green routing, and that goes back to kind of what I continually say about preparation and quality of data. By working on this over the next 2 months and having that information already pre-populated into our system and having gone through it, made sure it's accurate, then we are working on making sure that our aim is to have accurate data being entered to the revenue so that the risk of delays and the risk of orange routings is minimized. And there's always, random audit check that revenue need to do. But what we don't want is having to have errors because of bad information being submitted to the revenue. And then we retain a full audit history. So one thing I found in doing customs audits is when you look for the declarations 2 or 3 years later, it can be an absolute nightmare to find them. And even though agents are, keep the records for 3 years, it takes a long time to regather them. So we've kind of, one of my points of insistence was that we would have a very easily retained audit history. So when customs come to do the audit, it's very simple to just tap in the MRN number of the declaration they're looking for, and it will produce the declaration, all the backup documents, and the details as to why classifications or values or whatever was given at the time. So a full audit history, which probably takes about a month's work away when you're actually doing a customs audit. So if we look at a flow chart typically, and I'm going to end on this because I know we've had a lot to kind of retain into today. I just wanted to do kind of a typical example. So we've got an Irish company importing from GB. What are the critical things? Ensure the importer consignee declarant has an EORI. Ensure the importer is VAT registered in Ireland. Ensure that they have an established clearance agent. Assure the accurate details on tariff classification, valuation, origin. So these are kind of just very high level first steps to importing. Similarly, the Irish companies importing into GB and supplying goods to their customers on a delivered duty paid basis, they need a GB EOI. They need to be VAT registered in the UK. They need a UK established clearance agent. Again, same details need to be correct on tariff classification, valuation, and origin. I think that I've probably wrap it up there, Aidan. I could keep going for another 3-4 hours, but I don't think you'd probably want me to. So I might just wrap it up there and let any questions come through.
No, you're fine, and thanks, Carolyn. We'd mentioned that earlier. It is a massively complex area, and I think, you know, highlighting the role of the declarant is massively important. So, I mean, we will share everybody's details for queries and questions. I am conscious of the time, so thanks very much, Carol. We have Caroline still here and Noreen, and there's been a couple of questions coming in on the chat that I can put to them, but if anybody wants to unmute themselves and to ask a question there, feel free to do so if you like. John, yeah, unmute yourself there.
Caroline, how are you? And Noreen, I just want one question for both. Caroline, how do we deal with a groupage load on a transit? Can we put the whole lot on the one transit, all the groupage in it, and describe it as one load of groupage with 20 tonne? Or how do revenue want that reported?
In line with the legislation, John. Like if you're moving a transit, you can put everything on one transit if the office of departure and the office of destination is the same for all of the goods, and you need a line per item then for completion, the list of items on the transit. But all of that material is on the revenue website. Like nothing has changed, it's whatever the way you currently do a transit. But each consignment has to be listed separately on the loading list.
So, and no, this is the point I can't figure out is, I know we have a loading list, but do you put in the description as per loading list on the transit to put it all on the one transit?
Well, I would have to get somebody to, I'm not familiar with transit, but I mean, I know that we need all of the details of all consignor, consignee and goods item description at line item level. Whether that's in the declaration or on the loading list, I'd have to check and see.
10 out of 10 for getting the transits discharged at the port. Is it the possibility that the French and the other countries could get what you have in?
Well, we know our colleagues in I'm nearly sure in Dutch customs, that's what they're doing as well. I'm not too sure about in Belgium, and we know in France at the moment, they're suggesting going to private temporary storage facility operators to do that.
Thanks, Caroline. Noreen, just a quick question for you. If we're dealing as an agent and we're doing the declaration in the traces system on behalf of an importer, how do we exonerate ourselves for any possible charges that may come on a rejected load?
Oh, you can't, because once you take on the import control process, you're responsible for the consignment until it is either accepted, rejected, and by rejected I mean either destroyed or returned. So it is a cost that DAFM will bill to you, but that you then subsequently need to pass on to your client.
Okay, so I assume that's a legal thing we will have to have between the import. Thanks, Noreen.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, John. Yeah, in relation to discharging of French ports, like we have asked that question as well for clarification from the French Embassy, so I'll be providing a bit of information in relation to that one as well. There was another couple of questions there on the chat. One related to trade with Northern Ireland from the Republic of Ireland. Will there be a requirement to do declarations for ROI NI trade?
No, I mean, once the goods are on the island of Ireland, they're union goods, and there's free circulation of those goods anywhere within the island of Ireland.
Yeah. And what about in terms of health certification?
No, it's again, there's no border, there's no SPS checks for circulation within the island of Ireland. Obviously, if they're leaving the island, that's different. But no, not for movement between north and south.
Okay. Thanks very much. Just in relation to unaccompanied trailers, if there was, so we know from a roll-on, roll-off perspective, 30 minutes out, drivers have to check their routing for customs and so on. How is that information being provided to operators who are looking to collect trailers, and some of whom already perhaps are leaving trailers at the port for a couple of days after they arrive into the country? What time frame will revenue, or indeed agriculture, allow for the goods to be checked on trailers?
Well, I mean, when for unaccompanied or accompanied, it's irrelevant how you look up on the PBN, the channel lookup. So once the door is open on that system at 30 minutes out, it's there for, as far as I can remember, for a month or something like that. But I mean, you have to remember as well, though, Aidan, that the declarant, like, we are simply giving the channel lookup as a facilitation for trade. That's all. But I mean, the declarant will always have the routing for the individual declarations that are covered, that are that are in the trailer. So that is available to them also. So from the perspective then of like how long a trailer stays in any yard, I mean, our expectation is like that if something is orange routed, it's a business decision whether you're going to move the trailer from the ferry compound and park it up in T11 and wait for the supporting documents, or whether you're going to be allowed to leave it in the ferry compound. That's a matter between the trader and the individual ferry compounds. But if you are a vehicle that has been called for a physical inspection, you will not be put on our list for the get next function to call the next vehicle for inspection, unless you are in Dublin in T11 or in Rosslare if you're in Kilran, and you have checked in with us, and we know what bay number you are, and we know your mobile phone number, because that's how we're going to communicate with you, to tell you to go to whatever bay. So you have to come out of the compound and come up to one of our parking areas to do that. I don't know if Noreen, then, if there's any time limits for you for having to do an exam.
No, we don't have time limits as such. I suppose it'd be a feature of the type of product that's on board, you know, as to how quick they need to get it out. Our exact booking system or booking in system for the unaccompanied has not been finalised. I mean, we would hope to be able to do them at an off-peak time.
Yeah. With unaccompanied.
Oh, the unaccompanied,
trailers, so they're
yeah.
not the Lolo. Yeah, so these are going to be handled the same as the accompanied, yeah.
Yeah.
On the
so
get next function, on our get next, that we have to show you that function. So yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
so you ultimately will be in charge of the routing, but we don't have a time frame within to come, but we would hope to be able to facilitate them at an off-peak time if that worked out with customs. But that is just to be finalised, and we'll get back to you on that.
Yeah, I think just the thought process there really is, say for argument's sake, the ferry arrives in at 6 o'clock in the morning, and the trailer isn't collected by the tractor for the company until 4 o'clock that afternoon. So whilst they know what the routing is, and they may have to go to T7 for a documentary check or whatever else, they have to do their driver check-in at T11. Is there a risk, or they don't have to do that? Like, I suppose,
no, they'll only go in. I mean, you're either, if you are a seal check or a transit check, you will be sent to T7. That's the only place you go to. You don't check in anywhere. You just drive into the booth and you're sorted. Hopefully, in the happy flow, you're sorted and you're gone. You are only sent to the parking up area if you are a physical inspection, a non-electronic declaration, or if you arrive in and you're orange routed and we don't have the supporting documentation. and you're waiting. You're literally just waiting for the trader to supply it to revenue or to the agencies.
Okay. And is there a risk of additional delay for the unaccompanied trailers, I suppose, in the situation that they aren't picking up the trailer for hours after they've arrived? Like,
well, I mean, it all depends on if they're not, it all depends on what they're being stopped for. I mean, if they're being stopped for the transit or the seal check, if that's what they're coming over to go through, they're just lanes and they're going to process fairly speedily. But I mean, if it's a full physical inspection, they come in, they park up, they submit their electronic details into the system, and when the next available bay becomes available for exam, and they will be called for that exam. But I mean, as Noreen and us have repeatedly said to the trade, the delay will be really around the kind of inspection that has to be carried out, and whether the truck is a mixed load with like multiple agencies involved in it, and if the whole load has to be unloaded and whatever. But I mean, you have to come in and tell us that you're presenting the goods for inspection before you can get into the queue, be called for inspection.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks for the clarification on that. Okay, I am conscious of the time, and I very much appreciate everybody's time that you've given us. Thank you, Caroline, Noreen, and Carol. We will share this video to our members for the presentation. I think there's an awful lot of really good information, a lot to consider and think about. And the presentation slides will be sent out to those on the call as well. So unless anybody else had one final question, I will leave it at that, and thank you again. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Thanks, Aidan. Thank you.
Thanks, Mel. See ya.